there is a profound truth that can shed light on the origins of many emotional difficulties people face. Often, the main reason for these struggles lies in the fact that an individual, throughout their entire life, has never made a conscious choice in favor of themselves. Years may have been dedicated to tirelessly prioritizing the needs of others, always being available, always ready to help. A phone call, a sign of someone's need, and the person, without hesitation, is capable of putting aside all their affairs, abandoning all their plans to rush to their aid. The great thinker Carl Gustav Jung astutely pointed out that such a neglect of one's own essence for the sake of pleasing others is not a manifestation of genuine love. On the contrary, it is a slow but steady process of self-destruction. However, despite the seeming hopelessness, a path to liberation exists. Ahead lies a deep understanding of why neglecting one's unique individuality keeps a person trapped in endless suffering and, most importantly, how to break this vicious cycle before it's too late. It is important to await the culmination of this narrative, for the realization that awaits can transform one's perception of reality forever. A logical and extremely important question arises: at what point did a person stop being themselves? This isn't about the role of a friend, parent, or colleague, but rather about that unique, unparalleled individual hidden behind all social masks. Not about the image shaped by the pressure of others' expectations, but about one's authentic, undistorted essence. The answer to this profound question may not be immediately obvious, as this process usually unfolds gradually, almost imperceptibly to the individual. Often, the roots of this phenomenon go deep into childhood, when a person was systematically taught who they should be, how they should behave, and how to speak to earn approval and please others. Step by step, sometimes without even realizing it, the personality began to play a predetermined role, like an actor on the stage of life. Certain character traits, genuine desires, true emotions, all of this was carefully hidden, concealed from others' eyes, and sometimes even from oneself, just to be loved, accepted, and recognized in society. This desire for belonging, for approval, for conflict avoidance, becomes a powerful driver, forcing a person to retreat from their true nature. However, deep inside, a certain unease, a feeling of inner disharmony, may lurk. Perhaps the person experiences a deep sense of emptiness, incomprehension, as if they no longer know who they truly are. Often there's a persistent impression that life is not being lived in accordance with one's true self, as if the individual is trapped in a role they never chose for themselves. It is precisely this state that the distinguished Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung defined as the process of individuation. One can imagine this state as a metaphorical puzzle. At birth, it seemed, all elements of this inner puzzle were harmoniously connected, forming a complete and untouched picture of the personality. The person was whole, free from external filters and imposed roles. However, over time, some fragments of this inner world were set aside. The reason lies in social influence. Societal norms and upbringing sometimes instilled the idea that certain aspects of one's personality were unacceptable. For example, if someone showed excessive sensitivity, they might be told not to give in to emotions. If they were too dreamy, they were urged to be more pragmatic and realistic. Excessive spontaneity was suppressed by lessons in self-control. Thus, a reduced, censored version of the true self gradually formed. Individuation represents a profound path aimed at reuniting with these lost fragments of personality and achieving genuine wholeness. It is a purely individual process, unique to each person, during which awareness and liberation from externally imposed expectations occur, allowing one to return to their true, deep essence. However, this path is not always easy and straightforward. To reclaim these forgotten aspects of one's self, one must courageously confront what was once rejected or suppressed. A person must consciously let go of the so-called persona, the social mask created for adaptation and conformity to the demands of the surrounding world. However, from the deepest parts of the human being, something that has long and diligently been avoided breaks through. It is at this moment that the individual confronts their shadow, Just imagine a mirror that reflects not only one's outward appearance but also everything that has been carefully buried within: old wounds, suppressed anger, forgotten desires, abandoned dreams. It is this metaphorical mirror that the distinguished psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow, in Jungian understanding, is not limited to merely the morally flawed aspects of human nature. It is not solely one's flaws or vulnerabilities. The shadow encompasses absolutely everything a person has accustomed themselves to suppressing, because at some point they were taught that it was completely unacceptable to others. Why does an individual act this way? The reason lies in deeply ingrained fear, the fear of being rejected, the apprehension of losing love. Therefore they bury these emotions, these aspirations, these innermost needs. A person convinces themselves that certain parts of their personality have no right to exist. But the shadow never dissolves without a trace. It tirelessly persists, lurking in the depths of the unconscious, and emerges, manifesting in recurring daily difficulties. Why do some individuals invariably find themselves involved in similar toxic relationships? Why does a person repeat the same mistakes over and over again? Why is it so difficult for them to express refusal, to assert their own positions, to choose themselves? All of this happens because the shadow takes control of consciousness the very moment a person stubbornly refuses to acknowledge and accept it. One can imagine a person who, throughout their life, accustomed themselves to complacence, sought to avoid conflict, and invariably prioritized others' needs over their own. For many years they constantly yielded, said yes, even when internally resisting, driven by a deep fear of upsetting or disappointing others. However, such exaggerated compliance conceals something far more complex. It's an accumulation of hidden anger and deep dissatisfaction that builds up and eventually erupts, sometimes quite dramatically. Such people often don't realize why they react so unexpectedly sharply, why they feel depleted, why they are unable to assert their interests until they reach a breaking point. It is in these manifestations that the shadow archetype reveals itself in action. Every time a person stubbornly refuses to listen to their inner voice, every time they neglect their own authentic needs, they unconsciously strengthen that part of their psyche that persistently seeks to be seen and recognized. And it is precisely in this that the cause of deep inner suffering lies. There is a common belief that following others' expectations and adapting to them is the right path to harmony, but in reality, it turns into a betrayal of one's own self. And it is precisely such internal apostasy that serves as the true source of all emotional torment. However, there is also a hopeful perspective. The shadow is not the individual's antagonist at all. Its purpose is not to punish or cause harm. On the contrary, it is meant to awaken a person to awareness. The shadow points to areas where the personality has neglected itself, stimulates reconsideration, and placing oneself at the center of one's own priorities pushes one to give up the constant search for external validation, and finally, to make a conscious choice in favor of one's own well-being and self-sufficiency. How can an individual transform inner difficulties, or the so-called shadow, into a source of strength rather than a burdensome load? The fundamental insight lies in realizing the vital necessity of prioritizing oneself. This is not a manifestation of selfishness, but rather a condition for survival and sustainable existence. If a person experiences a deep sense of guilt when prioritizing their own needs, this phenomenon is by no means accidental. Throughout life, society has conveyed the idea that selfless giving to others is the highest virtue, that yielding one's interests to others is a sign of true affection, and that putting oneself first is egocentric. However, consider the example of a flame. If it burns too brightly, trying to warm everyone around, it will inevitably run out and extinguish. Can an extinguished fire illuminate anything or bring warmth? This is exactly what happens when a person forgets their own needs, completely giving themselves to others. The undeniable truth is that a person can only give to others what they themselves are filled with. How can one offer genuine support if the individual has completely depleted all their internal resources? How can one give full, deep love if they feel an inner emptiness and emotional exhaustion? How can one inspire others if they have neglected their own development and well-being? Let's consider a clearer and more vivid example. When a person boards an aircraft, the safety rules are crystal clear and unambiguous. In the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, passengers are instructed to first put on their own oxygen mask before attempting to help others. What is the reason for this instruction? The answer is simple. If a person runs out of vital oxygen, they will be unable to save anyone. A similar principle applies in everyday life. Prioritizing oneself does not imply alienation from others or neglect of their needs. It simply means ensuring one's own inner strength and resourcefulness to be capable of giving something genuinely valuable and tangible to others. Yet, why is this so difficult? The reason lies in deeply ingrained fears, the apprehension of being judged, the anxiety of being rejected, the fear of losing someone's love. However, the truth is simple and encouraging. Those who genuinely value a person will feel even greater affection for them when they allow themselves to be fully themselves. Learning to prioritize oneself means nothing less than breaking years of conditioning and habits. This implies the need to relearn the art of saying no, setting clear boundaries, and carefully listening to one's own needs without expecting external validation or approval. But how does an individual truly reclaim their rightful place in their own life? Prioritizing oneself is not an overnight decision. It is rather a lengthy process, a profound transformation that requires significant courage and immense patience. After many years of putting others' needs first, it is perfectly natural and understandable to feel fear, guilt, or even deep hesitation at the mere thought of impending changes. Nevertheless, this transformation is absolutely necessary, and Carl Jung left humanity powerful, effective tools capable of helping one reunite with their true self. It all begins with self-analysis, with deep internal exploration. One must find a moment of quiet and solitude to ask themselves one crucial question: who am I really, beyond what others expect of me? This question might seem deceptively simple, but its depth is colossal. It can awaken long-buried emotions, bring forgotten memories out of oblivion. To answer it means being fully ready to confront those parts of oneself that have been set aside and ignored for too long. One of the most effective methods to achieve this state is introspective writing. A person is encouraged to take a journal or notebook and begin writing down everything that comes to mind without any filters or internal judgment. This could include their innermost fears, deep desires, as well as various disappointments. Gradually, as these inner experiences take verbal form, the person begins to realize what sacrifices they made for others and what exactly was suppressed within themselves for the sake of being accepted by society. However, understanding alone is not enough. Action must follow. And one of the most challenging steps on this path is mastering the art of saying no. This means refusing what doesn't feel right, unrealistic expectations, and relationships that drain one's vital energy. Why is this so difficult? The reason lies in the fact that people have been taught since childhood to consider refusal as something reprehensible. From a young age, they were taught that saying no means disappointing others, showing ingratitude, or even risking rejection. As a result, people say yes again and again. They take on obligations that become an unbearable burden, tolerate painful situations, and exhaust themselves trying to be available to everyone but themselves. But every forced yes is essentially a no said to oneself. As soon as a person begins to set personal boundaries, significant changes occur in their life. This is not an act of rebellion against others, but rather an act of deep self-respect. To say no is not a refusal in a negative sense. It is an affirmation of one's own needs. It is not a manifestation of selfishness, but a recognition of a person's fundamental right to a full existence. It's not about a harsh and total negation of everything around, but about the ability to learn to listen to oneself before giving an answer. Instead of reacting automatically, one should pause and ask themselves, do I truly desire this? Am I saying yes out of fear or out of genuine inner inclination? The human physical body also possesses its unique language. Too often people are immersed in their thoughts, completely detached from their own bodily sensations. Yet the body, this ancient repository of wisdom, recognizes impending problems long before the mind becomes aware of them. Sudden onset of fatigue, persistent tension in the shoulders, a lump in the throat before insincere or forced agreement. All of these are nothing less than important warning signals. Reconnecting with one's body means reviving the ability to feel, to listen carefully to inner intuition, and to timely recognize these precursors before they transform into chronic stress, overwhelming anxiety, or deeply suppressed disappointment. Various practices such as meditation, active physical exercise, and even purposeful conscious breathing can become valuable tools on the path to this inner reconnection. Prioritizing one's own well-being is by no means equivalent to striving to become someone else. On the contrary, it is a path to returning to one's true essence, to who a person truly is. Such a process undoubtedly requires significant time and tireless effort, but absolutely every step, even the smallest one on this path, possesses immense value and has its weighty significance. The more attentively an individual listens to their own inner needs, and the deeper they demonstrate self-respect, the clearer they realize that their true worth is determined not by the quantity of what they give to others, but by the quality of how they treat themselves, how they honor and value their own personality. It is in this deep realization that genuine, comprehensive healing is born. However, this profound healing is inconceivable without accepting one fundamental truth. No one will ever come to save a person from the outside. Only the individual themselves is capable of choosing transformation. Who can make the firm decision that they are worthy of a full and rich existence? No one will appear at their doorstep to hand them official permission for a full life. No one will issue them a special certificate confirming the right to be themselves without embellishments or compromises. This colossal inner strength is already inherent in every person, and only they possess the exclusive right and opportunity to decide whether this strength will be activated and utilized to its full extent. A person's true recovery begins at that special moment when they realize that their own well-being is the paramount priority. This is by no means a manifestation of selfishness or a rejection of interaction with others. On the contrary, it is a profound return to one's true essence. For a long time, there was a belief that personal significance was determined by the ability to benefit others, to be indispensable, highly valued, and constantly in need of external validation. However, the true truth is that inner worth has never been dependent on external factors. It has always resided within, remaining untouched and silent, patiently awaiting the moment when it is finally recognized and accepted. On the path to this realization, resistance will inevitably arise and periods of deep doubt will appear. Some people in one's close circle may not grasp the depth of the changes occurring within them. They may even try to reimpose the role that was once so skillfully played. But it should be remembered that this is not their life path, but exclusively one's own, and only they alone have the power to decide to go this path to the very end, despite external obstacles and internal fluctuations. Within this narrative, it has been thoroughly examined why mastering the skill of prioritizing oneself is of colossal importance for achieving emotional well-being and healing. It has been demonstrated how society often cultivated in people the habit of neglecting themselves, forcing them to yield and agree when their inner voice insistently urged refusal, and to adopt various masks in an attempt to earn the approval and acceptance of others. Meanwhile, invaluable aspects of one's own personality remained hidden in the shadows, unable to fully manifest. The eminent thinker Carl Jung convincingly demonstrated that genuine personal transformation begins only when a person fully accepts themselves, embracing even those facets that were long suppressed. The process of individuation, according to his teaching, is nothing less than the restoration of inner wholeness, stopping the endless cycle of existence dictated by others' expectations, and finally, a conscious choice in favor of a full and meaningful life. Such a path requires deep self-analysis, attentive listening to one's own emotions, firm establishment of personal boundaries, and the development of the ability to say no without the slightest feeling of guilt. This is not a manifestation of selfishness, but serves as a vital act of self-preservation and deep self-respect. Prioritizing oneself implies a deep realization of the undeniable fact that an individual can generously share with others only what they have first cultivated and nurtured within the depths of their own inner world. It is precisely for this reason that the reader is currently invited to consider the practical application of these fundamental ideas. It is recommended to set aside time to thoughtfully ask oneself the fundamental question, what do I truly want? And, most importantly, one should show determination and courage to listen carefully to the answer received, for it is in this sincere self-discovery that the foundation for a genuine healing process is laid.